Hey guys, and welcome to the show. So when I was creating the database series, one of the parts of it had to do with text input output. We needed to be able to create new resources on the server, so that required the user to put some text in. So while I was tinkering, I just kept going, and long story short, I ended up with a really cool dynamic form validation solution. So I thought I'd put that into a separate video or series of videos to show you today, because maybe that's something on its own that you'd like to incorporate into your game. So here's the example. We've got 4 fields. We've got name, surname, age, password. If I try submit or click OK, what it's going to do is these inputs are tied to this button. So this is all one form. If I click OK, it's going to then say, can I proceed or do an action? It's going to go through each one of these inputs and validate them. So if I click OK, you'll see some validation pops up. Name is required, age in years is required, password is required. As I type things in, the validation disappears. You see that? If I try to put an invalid age and click OK, you'll see it still says age in years. It knows what an age is, knows it needs to be an integer, even though it's consuming just a string. And then password required, it can even hide the input, which is quite interesting. And if everything's good and I click OK, it then spits out all the information. You can see surname wasn't a required field. Now there's actually a lot going on here, and I want to continue to expand on this because it's not very responsive. For example, this is all set to a fixed sprite of that certain width, but there's no reason why we can't use tiles, and we can incorporate other properties that could build up different columns and different widths of these dynamic fields. So I think the best way for me to explain what's going on here and put it into bite-sized chunks that you can then pick and choose, I'm so far thinking about 3 videos. One video is going to be on dynamically rendering these input fields all through code, so using a DS list, construct inputs, and then have the form render them out. Then the second part, I'm thinking about going into input types. So for example, we know the name field is just a string, but the age field, we know that it's an integer, and this field we know is a secret, things like that. And then lastly, we are going to go into the actual validation, how each of these throw an error message and disallow the user to move on to the next action if there's something wrong with the form. So if you like the sound of that, stick around. We're going to be doing the very first part right now. But before we begin, please make sure you subscribe to this channel, hit the bell notification so you get notified on when the next parts are also available. So without further ado, let's jump into the code. We're going to start off pretty fresh. The only thing I'm going to have is the sprite for the text box, so it's right at the beginning. So this is the empty project. We've got a room new, nothing's going on in there. We've got a sprite text box. You might have seen this before. I've stolen it from one of my other resources, and it's centered just like that. Okay, let's go objects. Let's create a new object called object text box. Let's give that sprite. There we go. I'm also going to create another object called object form. Object form is going to control everything, well, at least everything to do with its own inputs. So you should be able to have multiple forms on the same screen at any one time. They shouldn't cross-contaminate, they won't interact with each other in any way, and they will hold on to and validate their own inputs. Okay, so let's add a create event over here. Let's just put this in the middle. Let's put it about 200 pixels from the top. And this is where the cool part is, the dynamic generation of inputs. I'm going to create a DS list called inputs. And then here in the create event, we can create as many inputs as we want. So we're going to say var inst equals instance create. And inst is a reference to this created instance. It's going to be an identifier. I'm going to say layer x, y, instances object text box. Here's another cool thing. You can supply this struct, which is a set of properties that will be injected into the object on creation, but it happens before the creation code runs, which is really neat. And this is where the fun comes in. DS list add inputs inst. Okay, so check out here, this struct. We can put things into this object text box to make it come alive. Well, to define what it is. So firstly, what I want to do is I want to create a property called form ID. And I want to give it the identifier of this object form. So this instance of that object form, that's going to tie these two together, this text box and this specific instance of object form. So if I put two of these forms in the room and I have the same create event, it should be able to technically create two object text boxes, but each one will be tied to its respective form. We can give it a label. Let's call this one name. And we can give it a max chars. How many characters do we want the user to be able to type into this? And this is where we will later on expand into where we can give it a type, we can give it validation rules or functions. We can actually pass a function in here, a reference, that we can then execute when we want it to validate. Very powerful stuff right in here. Okay, now I want to copy this guy. Let's paste it a few times. 1, 2, 3. I think I need to get rid of var. We can only do that once at the top. We can dispose of that right at the end. Then for the y over here, each one I need to increase by 35 on top of the sprite get height SPR text box. And let's copy that. And this guy's got to be 140, and then this guy's got to be 245. Okay, let's move this up. Right, so we've got the name. Let's do the surname next. We'll also make that one 25. Let's call this one the age, and we only want there to be 2 characters. Sorry for you 100 years of age, but this is from ages 0 to 99, it seems. And then here we're going to have password. Let's make that 16 characters max. Very neat. So those are all adding to this DS list called inputs right over there. And this could go on. You can add as many dynamic text boxes as one wants. In this example, I'm only doing 4 because that's as many as I need to introduce what's going on here. Okay, let's go to object text box now. A lot of what I'm going to go into here, you've probably seen in many of my other videos. This is the text input output. We're going to start with empty text. We're going to give it a max width equal to the sprite width minus 50. Give it a bit of padding left and right. So it can't get any further than this. Now note there's a difference between max width and max characters. Max characters is how many actual characters we allow the user to press into the input. But at the same time, the sprite resource itself has a fixed width in this case, in this version at least. So we want to make sure it doesn't go over that. So we're also just going to calculate the maximum that can be. So, it's either or that we want them to reach before we tell them to stop typing. Then max chars over here, I'm going to set to itself for 10. So if it's not passed in, then 10 is going to be the default max. Blink to false. The blink, remember, is this little blink thing. You can see the cursor blinking on and off, on and off. We're going to have a blink speed. Set that to 0.5. We want an alarm to manage the blink times blink speed. So that's going to be blinking every half a second. I'm going to make sure that we're not selected. So when the room loads, our form generates our dynamic text boxes, nothing's going to be selected. You have to click. We're actually also going to be doing some tabbing. There's going to be a tab index, and if you push tab, it's going to start with the first one. Push tab again, it's going to move to the next one, and so on, which is also quite nice. Let's go and create that alarm. So we're going to do 0, and I want to do this guy to fire it off again, and we just want to say blink equals not blink. We'll just do the opposite. All right, then let's go draw event. We need to draw self because we have this event. It's going to be invisible otherwise. Let's draw some alignment. Natural line. Let's do FA left. Okay. We're going to draw set V align. FA middle. Draw set color to see white. Nice. Now we want to actually draw the label, right? Because each input's got its own little label, telling the user, well, exactly what the input is for. So let's do x minus sprite width divided by 2. Right. That should put us right in the beginning. Then we're going to do y minus 50. We can tweak these when we see it actually work. The label is the property, remember, from, whoopsie, this guy, labels. That's me, name, surname, age, etc. And we want to put a colon at the end of that. And now we actually want to draw the value of the text. So we're going to say blink char equals selected and blink. We're going to do a pipe. Otherwise, we're just going to do nothing. And because I've got that stored into this property, it just makes the next line a lot simpler. So if we do draw text, sprite width divided by 2 plus 25, y, and then text plus blink char, just like that. So in this case, it'll either be, text with the blink at the end like that, or it'll just, be text on its own because it's not selected, or it's being told not to blink. Okay, so now we're going to go into something interesting, something a little different. I haven't done this before, but we're actually going to be going into functions. So functions allow us to store a reference to a piece of code for later, which we can then initiate or execute from some other place. So for example, what I want to do is I want to say that if we click on this text box, we're going to do a left pressed. I want to call a function called select. Now select doesn't exist anywhere. It's not a script. It's only going to exist to this object text box. So if we go back to the create, what we can do here is we can create a reference to a function called select, just like that. We can tell it to do something. And what's neat about this is once we have a reference to this text box or an instance of this text box, we can then call select itself, and then it'll execute some pieces of code that we don't want to have to do from some other object. Otherwise you'd have to say find me that instance, and you got to say with that instance do all these things. Here we can just say find that object and then run.select on it, which is really neat. So what does it mean to select? Well, it means we're selected firstly, and also our keyboard string is going to equal text. Now keyboard string is a property built into GameMaker, and it has all the keys, the key presses, all the data that's sitting inside what you've typed. So we want to make sure that when we select a new text box, it's going to then reset that to what the value of the text box is, so that it can continue typing. So that's what that guy's doing right over there. Now also we want to deselect this input if we do like a global click somewhere. So let's do global left pressed, and here we're going to say if not position meeting mouse x mouse y self over here. So if we click in the space, global space, but we're not clicking over this text box, then we want to set selected equals false. It's a bit of a no-brainer. Next up, let's actually capture input. So we're going to say key pressed any, and here we're going to say, well, if we're not selected, just exit. Just leave this event, don't continue, ignore it. Then next we want to say, well, are we allowed to capture any content? So we are selected, but can we consume from the keyboard string? And the only way we can consume from the keyboard string is if the length of the text, let's just say if it was equal to max chars, or string width of the text was equal to max width. So if we're at the limit according to max chars or max width, we've got too much content or too many characters, the only time that we're going to allow some input to be detected and consumed is if it's the backspace because we need the user to be able to say, oh, I've reached the limit, but I want to erase something. And not keyboard check vk backspace. Keyboard string equals text. I'm going to exit from this also. And then otherwise, we're just going to say text is equal to keyboard string. So we can keep updating it. Okay, so let's actually, we can test this out, I think. Let's go to our new room. Let's take our form and put it in the middle. Let's fire this up and see what happens. Okay, cool. So far, something's happening. Surname, name, age, these are on top of each other, so let's go fix that. We're going to go to our form, 35, 40, 142, 45, these are wrong. Oops, I think I need to say y plus over here. Yep, y plus, save that, let's retry. Okay, that's much better. Look how spaced out they are. So if I go into name, you can see now it's selected, it's blinking. Let's try this one, deselects that guy. Age, password. Now for now it's just going to let me type in anything. But look, we reached the end. That's not bad. There we go. As soon as it gets to the end, it stops. Yeah, that is very, very good. And that's only 2. And this password field is, I think it was 16. Cool. So the next thing we want to do is the ability to give each one of these inputs a bit of a tab order. Then they're going to be all listening for the tab key press, in which case it's going to cycle between these without me needing to actually click them. So if you have a controller or you want to enable sort of a mouse-free kind of interaction, we should be able to do that. Okay, so let's actually close that room. Let's go back to object form up over here. We are going to come up here where we're doing inputs, and I'm going to say focus equals 0, right? So that's going to say no focus just yet. Then next up, to each one of these inputs, I'm going to give them a tab order, and the tab order is going to increment by 1 for each of these. So let's just paste them there first, and then we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4. It's important that these have different numbers. They don't have to be in this order. You can let it bounce around. It doesn't matter. It's up to you. Save that. Then we want to go to add event, key press tab. I think it's in others. There it is. And then on here, we're going to say focus equals focus is less than ds list size of inputs. If so, then focus is going to be incremented by 1. Otherwise, it's going to be 1. So what this is going to do is it's just going to cycle through them. So if we have 1, 2, 3, 4 components or elements, if we start here, it's going to go here, then it's going to go to 2, then it's going to go to 3, and it's going to go to 4. And when it gets to 4, it needs to go back to number 1. So instead of going to 5, it's going to go to 1 again. So that's what that does. Then I'm going to have a for loop starting at 0. This is going to be less than the ds list size of inputs. So let's copy that guy. I++. And what this guy's going to say is find me all inputs belonging to this form. Ds list find value inputs I. And here I can say input.selected equals false. And check this out. Here I can say if input.tab order equals that of focus, because I have this reference to input, I can now call input.select that function. That's really nice about this, is encapsulates all that kind of things that need to go on. Form doesn't need to care what that means. All it needs to know is that there's an exposed function on that object that I can call. So for example, if we wanted to do other things on the deselect, we could create a deselect function and that could set it to false. It could show little messages, it could reset validation, or it could actually fire off some validation. It doesn't really matter. That's what's really powerful about these functions. It's what I'm growing to quite enjoy these. And I want to go back to text box create, back to that select function over here. And here I want to say form id dot focus equals tab order. So this is going to make sure to keep the form in sync when we select it. So if all 4 text boxes are listed, we should be able to push tab to cycle between them, but also if we click directly on a text box, it's going to tell the form, oh, by the way, your focus is currently this other input. So if the user goes and clicks tab again, it'll continue from that one, not start again at the first one. All right, so let's fire this up and see what happens. Okay, cool. So I haven't selected any of these yet. If I push tab, oh, look, see, cursor's over there. Let's push tab again. Now it's on surname, tab again. Now we're on age, tab again, password. Now here's the thing. Will it go back to name if I push tab? It sure does. It cycles all the way through as if these were inputs on a website, for example, which is really powerful. So now I'm going to click age, and if I push tab, it should go to password. You see, it skipped surname. It didn't start again, right back at the beginning. So that's everything for this first part. Let's call it dynamic forms. In the next video of this series, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be limiting this age to actual numbers, which, believe it or not, is actually quite notoriously difficult to do. And password we're going to have as a secret hidden story, which is quite interesting. So that might actually be a little bit of a shorter video. And then the third video, we're actually going to be putting validation in, where we can define validation rules very similarly to how we did this select function. So inside our form over here, we can have like validation functions like this, which is really neat. And we can tell it to do stuff in here to the actual text box. So I hope you found this video educational and helpful. Please feel free to comment, rate, and subscribe. The project files are in the description. Again, if you like what I'm doing here, please check out my Patreon. I really do appreciate the support. If you have any ideas of how far we can take, dynamic form validation in GameMaker Studio, please let me know. Yeah, I'm keen to expand this, as much as it can be useful. So until next time, happy coding, and I'll see you then.